Well, hello there everyone. Here to show you that a trained professional is like telling activity right here. As you see right here is I would hand you a sketch right here of like an automobile, and right here is like inside the classroom. And that knowing about the whole purpose about that, yeah, that for most professionals, if we were to think about that, for what's required to be a professional, and then knowing about is like our studies though. But if we were to think about this, like knowing about that, the whole part about being a student as well. That if showing up for class and doing our schoolwork, that type of stuff, and knowing about like for most students though is that pay for knowing for whatever that they teach you, and knowing about for the whole purpose about getting a job, and knowing about is like that for about the job though is like for a train though. That if we look at the sketch right here, knowing about is like you have right here is like the driver right here, and then along with the passengers. And if we were to look up closely here, is what I would do right here is like for demonstration though, is knowing about that you have right here is the driver, and usually that they say that no GPS, do not mount no GPS that's in the way of the driver. But let's just say that for most of the time with the trained professionals though is that that whenever if they're going to be driving to school, or if it's driving to work or somewhere like that, and just knowing about the safety regards, is knowing about besides the insurance, is knowing that the safety about the other passengers, such as if you're going to be traveling, and then knowing about exactly for the driver's responsible viewpoint, knowing that while they're driving is knowing that that they have the right to driver's license, and then on your hand that knowing about about the passengers, that that knowing that we may think that just because we got a car, like that don't mean that we can go ahead and be taxi service to other people that ask for a ride, that type of stuff. But let's just say the situation were to go be for like if you have passengers inside the car, and knowing that everybody that's buckled up, and then knowing from where they're going, and then from where the driver's going, like from during the road trip, anybody say that, yeah, well, just sit back and relax, enjoy the ride, that type of stuff. But let's just say on average though that with the insurance plan is knowing about the safety of the vehicle as well. Is it a couple of times that I noticed it while I was out driving, and just knowing that if this was right here was the example right here of me driving, and then all of a sudden it's like that how many passengers inside the car, inside the vehicle, and knowing about the insurance, that there may be enough room to sit about one or two passengers in the front, and about maybe 2 or 3 or 4 passengers in the back. But just knowing about that, really about how many students, how many passengers that they're students or co-workers, how many of them are wearing seatbelts, and on their hand too, to like the safety regards, is knowing about that if the insurance pays for that as well. That knowing about that for most of every motor vehicle, of knowing about if it's going to be between a truck or four-wheel drive, or any type of a vehicle like that. And just knowing that whenever I get into a car, if most of us, whenever I get into a vehicle, I keep thinking about is like the times from whenever I was a little boy, that I sitting in the back seat or sitting in the passenger seat, and just thinking about, it's like the things that you could be thinking about while you're enjoying the ride, such as that, oh well, that's a nice scenery over there. If there was like the clouds, if that the passengers, besides the music though, is that and I can tell anybody here that you even see it on those TV shows, to where that as soon as driving lessons, somebody gets driving lessons, and all of a sudden it's like, can we turn on the radio? No. They'd like want to listen to music, or nowadays with most automobiles that they have it to where that if you want to listen to the radio, and if you want to go ahead and other things that more likely the passengers would want to do while during the ride, and knowing about that's like, yeah, for knowing about if I was the driver, and knowing about with most drivers that they say that you got the rear view mirrors right here. You got one on this side, you got one on this side, both left to right, that will be east and west side, and you got the rear view mirror right there. I'm like, you got the rear view mirror right there. And knowing about is like they say that, for most automobiles, knowing that for how the rear view, how that, the windshield, how it's positioned too. But let's say this right here was the driver right here, and then you got the passenger, and just knowing that with the driver, that knowing about that, for what the person uses the car for. If they were to drive to class, and then knowing about all the materials that they need for class is not with them, such as, for inside their book bag, that type of stuff. But let's just say on average, though, is like, with the teacher and along with the student, is just knowing that, I'm like, yeah, that whenever you're in the classroom, that basically knowing that it's like, well, I bring the books and then I bring the supplies, but then on your hand too, the school, though the school can go ahead and provide the desk, but then on your hand, that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, for most students that where knowing about, I'm like, there may be a few things that maybe they had to provide as well, but on your hand too, one of those things could more likely a lot of times is the books and then writing utensils, that type of stuff. But let's just say that with most of the time the schools, that more likely that a place to sit down more likely would be already provided, like so far as a place to sit down and maybe a place to study. I'm like that a lot of times that they will more likely say that if you want to go somewhere with a wireless service or something like that, or anything else that more likely that's needed. But let's just say that it's like between the students, and then talk about if I for a job, though, for trained professionals, and knowing about for the professional that more likely needs to be known about is like the aware of their surroundings, as well as for how an understanding about what they need to do for if they're going to be inside of a vehicle. And I was also thinking about, like, for an aircraft, I was also thinking about maybe using a truck or maybe an aircraft as an example too. But let's just say on average, though, that it'll be a motor vehicle right here. You have right there is the passengers, knowing about how many passengers that inside the car, inside the vehicle, that are wearing seatbelts, and knowing about the it's like for the driver, though, with the driver that for the type of vehicle that they're driving, like, yeah, well, a lot of times the driver pretty much does goes where they need to go, and knowing about the passengers. And I can tell anybody here that sometimes while I'm driving, that the passengers even on the school bus, is like, if you're going to be driving a school bus, and a lot of times the students are going to be rowdy and loud too, and knowing about, I'm like, yeah, sometimes it's hard for the driver to concentrate on what street they got to turn at, or something that comes up, and knowing about the students, that kids on the wheels on the bus go round and round, that type of stuff. But let's just say that with these passengers, though, it's like you have right here is like in the front seat right here, and you have right here is a driver. That if we were to think about, I'm like, yeah, that is the driver. Is the driver responsible for nearly 50 to 80% of what's going on on the outside from the traffic, and then from the inside, and knowing about for whenever they got to turn and stop. And like, just like maybe a pilot is knowing about there's a passenger right here, there's a passenger right here, that passenger that more likely could be in his or her days to where in a daydream or something like that, but then the driver is focused on, it's like from the viewpoint, from where they're going, and then on your hand, and knowing about exactly about where they had to turn. And everybody say that, well, really, that for most passengers, though, that like really, what do passengers mainly do a lot of times during the whole hour or two of the road trip? What exactly are they doing? It's like for the students that the teacher gives a student a book to read, and knowing about exactly, don't just stare at the book, but you gotta read the book too. Like, well, I am reading it. Like, well, okay, well, what does it say? Like, well, you write a few paragraphs about what you read about the topic or something. But knowing about that, the whole part of training about professional, knowing about really is understanding about that, reasonable is like for like while we're driving, and then knowing for when we're studying, like for being a teacher as well, is knowing like the professional work, is knowing about for who stands for knowing about just to be counted as professional. It's like it's more than just saying. Some people that may say that, some that may think about is like, yeah, well, I got promoted, so I'm the king. I'm like, well, Just knowing about if you want to be called king or queen or manager is knowing about, it's like, if you understand about the whole purpose about, working for operating a car or flying an aircraft, or if it's anything to do with the properties management or anything like that. And just knowing about, for the field of study is knowing about, the things that more likely is understood about that the type of job, though, is the things that more likely that the person needs to be aware of from other people that maybe that they don't understand, is knowing that that really about, whenever you learn something, it's not just about the fact about, saying like, so far as I'm the king, I'm the captain, but knowing about, well, on the hand too, where's your experience for if you were the captain, and knowing about, that they're so far saying to where that, by the time that you're in that situation to where that, that you made the wrong turn, or, did you wind up making a mistake on something, that type of situation, and then all of a sudden it's like, seems like the price pays, and knowing about that there's an accident that happens, or something that gets turned in late, that type of stuff, job not done completely right, job not done right, something like that. But let's just say that right here is like with the motor vehicle right here. You have right here are these passengers. And let's just say that if they are like, you say that, that there's a toddler in the back, and knowing about some, parent, like knowing about, especially if you're going to be in the parking lot, is knowing that a lot of times it's something that may say that that happens to where that while they're driving, and then while the car's in park, it's like, no, don't leave a toddler in the car, especially if it's going to be 100 degrees outside, that type of stuff. And knowing also is knowing about while the car is moving, though, is that you have right here is that with most of the time with passengers, though, if this right here was me, and let's just say if I was driving, and knowing about anybody say that, well, what's it like to be in the driver's seat compared to all the other passengers, and knowing about, I'm like, that they're going to be, in that same car, they're going to be in the person's car, in the driver's car, and knowing about, I'm like, do they have the right to have the rules to where you gotta put your seatbelt on, or you can't chew gum, you can't turn the radio on, or you can, but then you gotta listen to the radio stations that for what I say, that type of stuff. And knowing about, whenever you get into somebody's car, is knowing about, like, you gotta, say, if you go by the rules, that type of, let's just say that if this was like a family vacation right here, and you have right here are these passengers, and knowing about, is like, that with the car, though, some that may say that, it's yours to go wherever you want, but on your hand, and knowing about there are these other passengers, about how safe it is. All these other passengers paid for on your insurance plan. And whenever you go into the classroom, is knowing that for the insurance, and as well as like for financial aid, is knowing about a few things that are not paid for. And on your hand too, there's knowing is like to be aware of that. Do you kind of call that professional to where, oh, well, you didn't quite, you weren't sure about that, or you'll do the research, that type of stuff. But on your hand, that knowing about is like you have right here are the passengers, and let's just say that with the passenger right here, if this was right here, was an example right here of me. And if I would be driving, and then all of a sudden it's like that, they say that, you can't get distracted while you're driving, especially that if you're working like a four-wheel drive, or if it's a stick shift, automatic transmission, type vehicle is doing it, but you have to keep your focus on the road, and that knowing that for like it's like checking the blind spots, that type of stuff. But let's just say that these passengers right here, well, they usually say that that you're putting the passengers at risk, especially that knowing about for how you drive, and knowing if it, not being too careful for how you turn off a lane, and knowing about with your insurance that for any type of collision that more likely that could happen, that more likely though is making sure that nobody gets injured, especially. But let's just say if those passengers are not paid for on your insurance plan. And just knowing about, just because you got a car with enough room for about maybe 3 or 4 more passengers, that don't mean that you can take them anywhere. And I can tell anybody here that knowing about that some some drivers that they may say that like, yeah, that they got enough to go around the table. They'll take them wherever they are. All they have to do is put gas in the car. Like, well, sometimes that don't work either. So I encourage anybody knowing about, for most drivers though, for like maybe the state of Missouri and the state of Illinois, and knowing about, like, if we're going to be driving, making sure that got insurance, and especially that if you got like the type of insurance to where for which each person, if they that they're paid for as well for any type of injury. But you have right here, or like is the driver right here, and then the passengers. And knowing that whenever I'm in the driver's seat, and I keep thinking about, I'm like, yeah, whenever you're in the driver's seat of a car, and just thinking about that for a lot of things that you got to be aware of compared to the passengers. The passengers, they may only have to be aware of knowing about, I'm like, yeah, for what's going on the east side. It's like if there's any construction going on this side of the road, they're like, oh, look at that. That they're about almost finished with that building. There could be a building about right here where it shows like if there's any construction going on this side of the highway, and knowing about that if the road were about right here, and then you're looking at what's going on this side, but then let's just say on the other side that like we say is like you have right here coming up to a sign that says the speed limit. The speed limit is 35 miles an hour. Say the speed limit's 35, 35 mile per hour, and all of a sudden it's like that. Be aware of knowing about it's like your surroundings, and it's like from ahead, behind, and along with the blind spot. But other than that, like I talk about right here is talk about, say, for the trained professional stuff, say talk about connectivity.